Let's see. All right. I seem to be off mute. Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our town hall. Books, bands, and boogiemans. I'm hoping that folks are able to settle into the space and become present with us. And we are really grateful that you're showing up. So thank you for that. We have a fantastic program for you all today, but before we start that, I really would like to thank LocALL members, and I would like to thank them individually and some of the folks that organized this. So LTA, Louisiana Trans Advocates. I'm Pearl Ricks from REJAC. For those of you who don't know me, I'll get into that in a moment. The Southern Organizers Academy, Forum for Equality, and the ACLU of Louisiana. And thank you all for participating in this call. My name is Pro Ricks. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the executive director for the Reproductive Justice Action Collective, or REJAC. Many of you probably know us through the community, and hopefully some of you are meeting us for the first time today as we start building coalition and we continue building community throughout the state around issues that matter to us. So I would like to center us before we start our evening and say that while the name of what we're doing is real cute, it's real cute, the topic really isn't. So I would like to make space and center and honor that we are ultimately discussing the attempted erasure of entire cultures and entire peoples, and we are fighting that. And we have successfully fought that together. And that's not always easy. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for being willing to go through this conversation with us as we explore book bannings that are happening through Louisiana, whether in our school system or in our public library system, censorship that is going through the state, and how that impacts us on a policy, legislative, social, educational, community level. I would like to take this moment to let folks know if you want to put any comments, any thoughts, any questions in the chat, we will be able to see them and we will get to your questions during a Q&A. So if anything comes up while one of the speakers here, the amazing minds that are here to share with us today, if anything comes up for you, feel free to put that in the chat and we will field it and make sure that we get around to it during our Q&A or at an appropriate time. So once again, thank you for being here with us. And I would like to introduce one of the marvelous minds that I've been talking about for this evening, and that's Lindsay Bach-Friedman from the Anti-Defamation League to give an overview of book bans around the state.
Thank you, Pearl. It's great to be here tonight. It's an enormous honor to be here and to be able to share a little bit about what ADL has been seeing around the state and sort of, I guess, what inspired this conversation. So my role tonight is just to really help set the stage, and you'll hear in a few minutes that book banning is not new, but the most recent uptick in censorship is impacting the LGBTQ plus community we've seen a significant increase here, especially in Louisiana. And again, while the conversation tonight is specifically focused on this community, it's important to share that this all fits into a broader context of attacks on race and racial justice, identity, education around diversity, equity, and inclusion. At ADL, we know the importance of children's books as both mirrors and windows for young people. Mirrors help children see themselves reflected in what they're reading, so their lived experiences are acknowledged, appreciated, and valued. Windows assist young people in learning from and about the experiences of others who don't share aspects of their identity. Starting at a very young age and up to teen years, children's books open doors to conversations about identity, diversity, bias, and social justice. Conversations that are an integral part of a young person's education. And it's critical that young people see themselves in the books that they are reading, and attempts at censoring access to specific identities can be extremely harmful and alienating. There's a long history of attempts at censorship or restricting access to books, and that challenge preconceived notions or biases. So I'm just going to share a little bit about what's been happening in the last few years right here in Louisiana. So I'm going to start a couple of years ago. In late 2020, in Livingston Parish, or Ruston, Louisiana, there was an attempt to remove children's books with LGBTQ themes from library shelves. While they weren't successful, this was certainly the start of I would say, our current state of ongoing challenges through the state. In March of 2020, in Livingston Parish, the library board voted to change the makeup of their reconsideration committee from 2 librarians and 1 board member to one librarian and two board members. So shifting the balance of power in how decisions are made about what books are reconsidered for shelf life. And after several years of failing to, this happened because for several years they tried to remove the book called This Book is Gay. And because they weren't successful, they shifted the balance of power so that the library board had more power than the librarians themselves. So this all led to Amanda Jones, a librarian from Denham Springs, who we'll hear from in just a few minutes. She filed what has now been a dismissed defamation lawsuit against local activists for their public outrage after she chose to speak out against censorship in the community. And in St. Tammany Parish over the summer, there appeared to be dismay over an LGBTQ book display during the month of June that led to conversations about proposed censorship of books in St. Tammany. Public support for the display was swift and effective, and it shut down the conversations for now. But there remain activists in our community throughout our state actively seeking to ban books, particularly LGBTQ plus themed books, as a means of censorship. This assault on books and on our libraries who wish to spread inclusive messages is a part of a much larger assault on inclusive and accurate education in our schools and within our communities. We must be aware of potential legislative efforts to ban books as a part of a larger culture wars battle, which includes divisive concepts bills, anti-trans and don't say gay bills, and more. And that all goes to the very nature of who we are as a country and as a people. So that's my quick primer on where things stand. So Pearl, I'm going to turn it back to you and happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much on that primer. I had one question that popped up. I won't save it to the end, but you said that it went from having two librarians in, was this Livingston?
Yes.
Okay, so in Livingston, that process, and what did you call that process?
It's the reconsideration committee.
The reconsideration committee was two librarians and one board member, and is now one librarian and two board members. And I just wanted to know, how often do you believe that board members are as equipped as our librarians and as our educators and as folks that rate books on what can I say, on like age appropriateness? How often are board members in alignment with that information or even aware of that information?
I would say, generally speaking, you trust the experts, right? The librarians are librarians for a reason. They've gone to school. They are educated in. They're actually educated in this conversation. I also don't want it to be dismissive of board members and to say that Absolutely. They weren't educated, and they may have area of expertise as well. But in this case, I think it would be as if we were taking educators out of the conversation, right? Taking librarians out of the conversation in what books got put into the libraries. They do know what's best for ages. They know what's best for their community. And I think that librarians, and what I'm seeing so far in the state is that librarians certainly understand the community and and that mirrors their windows piece, right? They understand that students that books both teach them that who they are is okay and accepted, but also that there are other ways of living, and there are other cultures, and there are other dynamics out there. It would be as if we pulled books again about Martin Luther King or Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Like, we need to learn about these heroes in our community as well. So I think it's really important, and I think librarians are being discredited in a way that I don't find acceptable.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering that. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy. And as a reminder, if there are any questions that you folks have, if it's coming up for you now, maybe it'll come up at another time, feel free to put it in the chat and we will make sure we get to that. So that is a perfect tee up to a video that we have for you that is by Amanda Jones, the librarian that Lindsay was just speaking about. And she will go into the difference between censorship and challenges and banning, and also talk about intimidation as one of the tools of banning literature in our public libraries and in our schools, and the threats that come of that. Something that is really important to connect is that it's not just just an attack on a book, it's an attack on multiple communities, and that ripples throughout our lives. So when we look at books that are written by or about Black people and the Black experience, the whole of the Black experience, when we look at books that are written by or about Black trans people, by or about LGBTQIA plus people, that's when we start seeing restrictions. So Amanda will go into that. I'm really excited for what she has to share with you all. And I hope that you take all of these pieces and string them together and form, think of some ideas of how you might want to get involved. What is your action item? What is your role in our community as we protect information, literature, and representation?
Hello, everybody. I am so excited to make this video, and I'm so sorry I couldn't be here in person, but I'm excited to make this video for you to talk to you about censorship. And to introduce myself, my name is Amanda Jones. I am a 22-year educator from Watson, Louisiana, 14 years in the English language arts classroom, and 8 years as a school librarian. I am the president of the Louisiana Association of School Librarians. I was the 2021 School Library Journal co-librarian of the year with my friend Diane from Hawaii. I love being a librarian, particularly a Louisiana librarian. And I am here to talk to you today about censorship, which is not a fun topic at all. But it's something that I think people need to be aware of, because we're starting to see new legislation, and we're starting to see a lot of pushback at schools and public libraries around the topic of censorship, book challenges, and book banning. Now, recently, we have seen a rise, and I'm going to share with you the numbers of the past 3 years that we're seeing in the American Library Association on the trend in book banning and censoring, and talk to you about what's the difference. But really, in my opinion, there are two things that have triggered this sudden push. Number one, you're seeing a push from school teachers, public libraries, and school librarians who are making sure that people.
Thank you so much, Peyton from LTA, who is backstage handling our backstage work. So I requested that the video be paused because, as I was centering earlier, I wanted to connect it to something else in the space. That during the conversation, Amanda is going to be having its amazing information, and also there's a trigger warning or a content warning that I would like to offer to all of you, just so you know that it's coming. There's conversation around threats that have been made on professionalism, on lives, intimidation, as well as the mention of sexual assault, very briefly, in terms of books that contain those types of themes, books that contain different types of information. So I really wanted to offer and pause and offer a moment that you all could sit with that and know what you are fully getting into as you listen and absorb this. So thank you, Peyton, once again, for pausing it and allowing me to offer this to the folks viewing, and we can continue our video.
The community and people at schools know that libraries are for everyone, and that everyone, if say for instance, I'm a school librarian, I want every single child in my school to feel seen and heard and feel safe. And we do that by diversifying our library collection. When I first stepped into the role of school librarian 8 years ago, our collection was not very diverse. And a few years later, I read a book called Marley Diaz Gets It Done, and So Should You, by Marley Diaz. And she is the founder of 1,000 Black Girl Books. And she made the comment on a talk show that I was watching that when she was growing up, which was funny because she was still a child, she was like 12, 13, 14. When she did the interview, she said, but growing up, all she saw or all they read about in school were books about white boys and their dogs. And I really sat and thought with that. And I looked at my library collection, and when I looked around and I saw really a lot of our books, the main characters were white boys or dogs. And so I made a very conscious effort to make sure that everyone was represented. And I've done that in our library collection over the past few years, which hopefully now Our collection reflects every student from every walk of life in our community. And I love the quote by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop that you see on the screen, that books should be windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. Is one of my favorite quotes. And it kind of, it shows that all students and library patrons, they deserve to see themselves in the books they read in class, the books found in the school library, the books found in the public library, and children need books that are mirrors. It allows them to see themselves and their own experiences in a book. But they also need books that are windows. They can look through and they can see other worlds to make comparisons between their world and other worlds. And then sliding glass doors that allow them to enter into other worlds. And I think that in order to have more empathetic students and children in our society, we have to diversify or provide as much diverse literature as possible. It just builds empathy and makes for a better world, in my opinion. So we're talking about the subject of censorship. Censorship can include vandalizing pages. Some teachers, and they're well-meaning, they might have a book. There's a book that I can think of called No David. It's a picture book by, I forget who wrote it now, but it's called No David. And in it, the little boy, it's a picture book. And in it, he's doing something he's not supposed to. And the parents, no, David, no, David. And in one picture, he's running through the house and it shows his bare butt. And he's like a toddler. And it's like, no, David. And I know there are teachers and librarians out there who have gone in and they've drawn little pants on him, or they've colored over his little butt. And that is censorship. And so censorship can also be hiding resources. We see sometimes maybe a principal or someone or director of a public library doesn't like a book in the library, and they'll just go hide it in their office. That is censorship. If you require parental access, parental permission to access content, that's censorship. And we're seeing that in Florida right now. There's some different laws and bills that have passed, and different counties require different things. And in some of the counties, they make the parents have to sign permission to get library books. And then there's soft censorship, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. It's something that we're starting to see more prevalent in schools. But people who are censoring, I always like to remind people who censor are never on the right side of history. And we've seen a lot of the people that have been pushing forward with these censorship issues the past year are not very nice in their efforts, and they can get very, very personal in their efforts when you go against them, when you speak out against censorship. Now, there are two, we have challenges and we have bans. So a challenge would be an attempt to remove or restrict materials or services based on content. So right now, the current trend is we want to protect the children, and people will say these books are pornographic, but they might be talking about a sexual health book that is for teenagers and it's in the teen section, or they might say this is an abomination, and it's a book with an LGBTQ author, and they try to say it's somehow pornographic or erotica, or and we have to look at these books and be very careful with these challenges, and not just, we have policies in place. So anytime anyone wants to challenge a book, whether it's a parent or a library patron, all libraries have policies. And if you don't like a book, you can go fill out a challenge form, and the group, whether it's at the library or the school, there's committees, and they decide, should the book be relocated to an older section? Maybe it does have some pictures in it that maybe don't belong in a teen section. Maybe that does need to be in the adult section. But those decisions need to be made by professionals, professional librarians, professional educators, people that know their collection and know their stakeholders and know where it best belongs in the library. And most definitely should not be relocated just because it's a book with an LGBTQIA plus character or author. Now, so you have challenges when these are attempts to restrict materials, but then you also have bans. Ban is the actual removal. So you challenges, and then if they're successful, it's a ban. And these are the removal or the books or the cancellation of services. And sometimes what we're seeing recently is that people want to skip the challenge section and just go straight into the banning. And we're starting to see that a lot more, and it's very concerning. If you look at the data on censorship that's been collected by the American Library Association, most challenges stem from parents. 82% are books, materials, and 62% is happening in school libraries or school, whether it's in the school library or whether it's the school in the curriculum. 62% takes place in the school building. So there is this graphic on here that shows you reasons for challenges include Black Lives Matter, or someone will say it's anti-racist. Like, I don't know why that would be bad, but it's anti-racist, or it's political, or we're brainwashing children, or it might have a topic like rape or something like that. Now, and we're going to talk about age appropriateness in a minute. But these are some of the reasons that people give for wanting to challenge or ban books. You can see I'm trying to take my face off here so you can see it better. But you can see on the screen the top 10 most challenged books of 2021. And you can see that regardless of what people say their reasonings are for challenging books, if you look at this list, almost every single one of them either falls into the category of being by or about an LGBTQ plus community member, or a person of color. So it could be written by a Black, Indigenous person of color, or have those characters. Majority of these books. So I don't care what reasons they're giving. It's obvious why they are challenging these particular books. So in 2021, 273 books were challenged. In 2020, 273 books were challenged. In 2021, that went up to 1,597 titles. They were successful, and 729 books were banned. Now we're in 2022. We are set to beat the record of 2021, and we're in October now. And you can see that just from January to August, there were 1,651 titles challenged. And so far, 681 have been banned. This number is unprecedented, and it's alarming. And we're seeing that it's very coordinated, and it's a national effort to silence marginalized or historically underrepresented voices. And, this is a comment from our American Library Association president. They want to deprive all of us of the chance to explore a world beyond the confines of personal experience. Surveys also indicate, this is what is scary to me, that 82 to 97% of book challenges aren't even reported. So there's probably way more that we just don't even know about, and they receive no media attention. PEN America, I urge you to Google PEN America. They do updates on the current state of censorship. Britton Follett, who is the CEO of Follett Publishing, who runs, they sell library automation systems, which is what most schools and public libraries use in the libraries to keep track of books. Britton is the CEO, and she said, this is being driven by legislation. It's being driven by politicians aligning with one side or the other. We know what side they're leaning on. And in the end, the librarian, teacher, or educator is getting caught in the middle. So we always talk, school and public libraries are very different. So in a school, my school is 5th and 6th grade. So according to my collection development policy, I buy books that are written for age relevant to 10, 11, and 12-year-olds. A public library is completely different. That is for ages of birth to death. It's for anyone. So you should have a variety of age ranges in a public library, whereas mine is more centralized because of the age range that I teach. And what I wanted to point out about age relevancy is you can have a book on the same topic just written for different age levels. So The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas is just an excellent book. Wonderful. But it's professionally reviewed, I want to say, for grades 8 and up. So I have grades 5th and 6th. So I wouldn't have that book in my library because it's rated, professional book reviews say recommend ages 8th grade and up. But what I do have in my library is Ghost Boys by Jewel Parker Rhodes. That is along the same topics. However, it's written for my age group. And I also have The Talk because I can also have books younger. So I have picture book called The Talk, and I have Ghost Boys because I have 5th and 6th grade, so I can have their age range and younger, but I can't have The Hate You Give because it's for an older audience. So age relevancy is key in a school library, but a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, that book's not age appropriate. And it'll be a book written for a 12-year-old. Well, if it's professionally reviewed for 12-year-olds, it's probably where it should be if it's in the young adult section. But again, every library has a challenge policy, and anybody that is if it's a parent in a school or it's a community member, you can always go in and fill out the challenge form and challenge what you're seeing. Now, the sad thing about what's happening with all this censorship talk and personal attacks on libraries and educators is you're starting to see a lot of educators and librarians who are scared to even purchase books. And it's called soft censorship. When you're limiting or never purchasing books that are needed in your library or in your school because you're scared of the backlash. And it's a very scary thing. Especially, I know I have several educator friends who live paycheck to paycheck. They're single parents and they're scared to lose their jobs, and they don't want to push the envelope. And that is very harmful to our kids. It tells kids when we don't have books that represent everybody, it tells certain children that they don't matter, and that is not okay. Now, the current situation that I'm facing right now, I'm a school librarian. However, I heard that censorship efforts were being talked about in my public library system. So on July 19th, I went to my public library board meeting. Every library in Louisiana, each parish has a public library board for their library, and anybody can attend these meetings. I went to mine and I gave a very blanket statement on censorship. I quoted the Trevor Project. I quoted the American Library Association. And I talked about how these books target historically marginalized communities. And it was a very blanket censorship talk. And I reiterated 3 times that, if you don't like a book as a community member or as a parent, you can go fill out a challenge policy and you can have it reviewed. But that I believe in parents' rights. I have a child and I have the right to teach my child the way I see fit. However, I don't have the right to teach other people's children. Obviously I'm a school teacher, so at school, I'm not talking about school, but I don't have a right to say, no, this book should not be in the library because I don't like that group of people. That's not acceptable. So anyway, I went and gave a 3-minute speech, and a few days after, I was targeted on social media by 2 different groups that I am going to rename, not name, but one is a group that does this often to libraries across our state. And the other is not even really a group. It's like the local yokel keyboard warrior. And they were posting things, memes about me, saying that I advocate teaching anal sex to 11-year-olds and that I promote giving pornography and erotica to 6-year-olds. And the memes and the social media posts were shared far and wide. They were very graphic. And then in the comment section, people were commenting things like I needed to be fired, I needed to be slapped. Somebody said, bring on the purge. And then the posters of the original comments kept doubling down like, yeah, she does this. It's been a very, very hard few months for me. And I decided that I had enough. And a friend of mine, very good friend of mine, she started a GoFundMe. And because I am afforded privileges and I do want to recognize my privilege, that because I was National School Librarian of the Year last year, I'm very well connected with people. And I was able to get my story told on NBC, CNN, USA Today, Insider, New York Times, Huffington Post. and my GoFundMe for my legal defense is pretty large. And so I decided to take my defamers to court. I also want to recognize the privilege that I work in a school system that supports me. I did not speak out against censorship at my school, rather in the public eye, but my school system has been extremely supportive. I also want to acknowledge the privilege that I have as a white straight woman, that it is safer for me, I feel, to speak out because I am privileged. And I don't want to give I hate saying that because it feels like I don't want to give off white savior vibes, but I think that a lot more people who are my skin tone should be speaking out against censorship. But I filed suit, and we had a hearing, and the judge decided that that was their opinion, that I give pornography to children and promote anal sex to 11-year-olds. And so that was my opinion, and my case was dismissed. And I thought about just dropping it and just leaving it there. But I got angry. And I just kept getting more angry. And I got a new legal team. And I have 2 amazing attorneys now. And I'm also backed by 2 other law firms that are kind of in the shadows. And we filed a motion for a new trial. It's a 94-page document for new trial, because I am tired of these people from these extremist groups using educators and librarians, or whoever they choose to use, as pawns in these political games. And they say, we're protecting children. No, you're being transphobic, you're being homophobic, you're being racist, depending on which situation you're talking about. I'm not just talking about my case. I'm talking about cases all across the United States. And I've had enough, and I've had enough for everyone. So we filed a 94-page motion for a retrial. And maybe I'll win, and maybe I won't. But at least I can say I didn't give up on the first go round, because the kids are watching. The kids are watching. And I want my students to know that I value them. All students, whether you're white, brown, gay, straight, Christian, non-Christian. I want every single one of my students to feel safe and loved in my school, safe and loved in my community. And I want them to know that they matter and that they care. And I think it's important for other people to take a stand when if we are able, and if it's safe for you to do so, and if you're in a position of privilege where you can, to take a stand and fight back. It's just very important to me. So we shall see how my trial goes. As of right now, as I'm recording this, who knows? But at least I can say I didn't give up. Some articles of note. If you ever want to read more about censorship, if you go on Book Riot's website, they keep a censorship page, and they have articles, all sorts of articles that they keep updated weekly on censorship. And recently, some legislators introduced a bill called the Right to Read Bill. And it is a national bill that will expand school library access and affirm a student's right to read all sorts of diverse literature. So cross fingers this passes. I guess it kind of depends on the upcoming elections, but we do have some legislation in the works that could be very positive for our students and for our community. If you ever need censorship resources for your community, if you see that your community is facing censorship challenges in your schools, I would encourage you to attend school board meetings. I would encourage you to attend library board meetings. If you're not attending, a lot of these stream. Like, I know my school board streams, so I'll just sit back at my house and watch it and see. A lot of all of the school boards and all of the public library boards, they post their agenda online, usually 24 to 48 hours in advance. Go keep track of where you live and what's being on these placed on these agendas, and show up. If you're watching this video, you're probably already a person that shows up. So tell your friends and get them to show up as well, because the more people we have that show up and speak out, the better. Online, there is a Get Ready, Stay Ready community action toolkit for parents and caregivers. And there is also a resource that is to combat false narratives that are and misinformation out there. It talks about what the words indoctrination, when you see the word indoctrination and woke and pornography, and it gives some insight into why those words are being used and dispels some rumors. All of this can be found on the Louisiana Association of School Libraries on our website. I'm the current president, and we have, if you just Google LASL or Louisiana Association of School Librarians, we have a Weebly website, and there's a link called Censorship Toolkit, and you will find all of this information. We're also working on a Louisiana Public Library Directory, which is like a one-stop shop where you can go to find all of the agendas and all of the meetings for every county. Also, if you're looking into finding more censorship resources, American Association of School Librarians is working on a document right now. If you Google Freedom Fighters or Every Library or School Librarian Martha Hickson, you will get tons of resources readily available to help you. And PEN America, PEN America just published a tip sheet for how to combat online harassment, especially online harassment that centers around censorship. So I urge you to check out all of those resources. And I'm sorry I couldn't be in person, but I hope this video was okay, and I hope you learned a lot. If you ever have any questions, please feel free to email me at librarianjones03@gmail.com. Check out librarianjones.com. There's a speaking out tab, and you can, if you'd like to stay tuned and see, keep up with my story and my trial, and you can follow me on Twitter at ABMACK33. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening and a wonderful, wonderful weekend if it's the weekend.
Excellent. Thank you, Amanda, wherever you may be right now. I don't know if you're listening or you're doing some other things. Thank you for that. And also thank you everyone who is still hanging with us, everyone who has joined us. I hope that that was helpful information and started to continue stringing the threads that we've been weaving today. I would like to elevate some of that information because there was a question coming from one of the viewers about how folks can get involved locally. There was a measure to remove a book in Slidell, and that book is an LGBTQIA book, and it's already hidden in the adult section. So that is something that came through. And I want to highlight that some of the resources that you'll find via the links that we've been posting, some of them are aged, but some things age really well, and then some of them are more fresh. So as you're clicking around these resources, please also sign up with LTA's action team so you can get more information about LocALL and our efforts as we build things that are accurate and up to date alongside this other information. So that's latransadvocates.org/advocate for things that are coming in the future. And for things that we have available in the chat, you will find a parish public library list done by region for Louisiana, and that will let you know the website for your parish library, and that way you can see the board meeting updates and keep track of the board meetings that are going on in your specific parish. And then there is the getreadystayready.info toolkit that Amanda mentioned. I'm currently on this page right now. That's why I keep looking over. And there are library org resources, there's civic engagement resources, LGBTQIA support, there's trainings and short courses. So please click through those and see if there's anything that is useful to you. And I also like to empower people to get in touch with organizations and coalitions like us so we know what you need and what we can be creating as a working group and as a space that you come to get this information. So please poke around there. There's also a page that goes on about advocacy. There's an advocacy toolkit. It gives guides, scripts, messaging, and communication info. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for submitting it. Thanks once again, Amanda. And I wanted to say that amidst connecting critical race theory and the attacks on intellectual freedom in Louisiana and Don't Say Gay and bans on individuals, it's a multi-pronged effort, and it's a well-rounded effort to snuff out entire communities. And I really think that it's important to elevate that, because it is a subject that we have a right to get serious about. We have a right to sit in, and we have a right to bring joy out of that. And the joy that I'm talking about is the fact that we cannot have this conversation and leave out the readers and the writers. We have two amazing writers that I'm very excited to be introducing. The first is Ashton Young. And Ashton will be, their pronouns are they, them, will be letting us know the effects on queer writers. And then after that, we have a young queer writer that will be speaking to the impacts that it has there. So Ashton, if you are ready, I would love to bring you into the space and listen to what you have to share about how this impacts queer writers.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Pearl. And thank you all for having me here. I hope I'm heard over there. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Ashton, and I work for the Reproductive Justice Action Collective, but I also am a writer. I've been writing since 2011, and I also have been writing in the context of identifying always as a Black queer writer, right? So I'm a Land and Literary Fellow, meaning that I was attended Land and Literary Foundation for queer and LGBT writers, and also have judged a lot of books that are trans and LGBT and queer centered for adults, nonfiction, and youth when it comes to judging contests and awarding books that are actually making a really big difference in the queer world. So in 2018, I was a judge for Publishing Triangle, and I was able to read a lot of amazing trans and queer led books. So I have a very short period of time, but in like sort of teacher style, what I wanted to do was just share how these bans can impact writers in the future, share how the bans impact authors that also like concurrently also affects writers, and just share a couple of the books that have been really influential in my life when it's come to queer and trans reading. I just want to say briefly, I've been published in a couple of anthologies, one of which, this is an anthology called All About Skin. It is published by the University of Wisconsin. And I'm bringing this up because I just want to say that it is already hard enough for queer and trans and brown and Black writers to actually break into mainstream publishing. I have a story in here called The Great Pretenders. It is for my father and for Trayvon Martin, sort of written around that time period. And I had a lot of issues in terms of advocating for my character to be non-binary and androgynous, and it wasn't even relevant to the story, right? So I think in terms of like the gender of the character did not dictate the way the story happened, but I found that I had to like really represent myself in how I write my characters, queer, non-binary, and like on the spectrum, right? So yeah, I think I do the point that I want to make there is like, it is really devastating to hear that there are so many books that have been come after when it comes to covering this, because as a writer, it's so important for me to see the writing in the world that I want to aspire to. And queer and trans writers have always done that for me. So the idea of books being censored and not being able to be viewed as someone who is a writer limits this idea of us being able to like write and create into the future, right? Like if we can't have access to the queer narratives that exist right now, then it's hard for us to create those narratives. Sitting in workshops with LGBTQ writers, right? And having support from LGBTQ staff members and writers and university heads was really supportive in terms of we can put our work out into the world, right? So I just kind of want to share three titles that have affected me as a writer. These titles were judged when I was like judging the Triangle Publishing Award in 2018. So I was able to get like an influx of wonderful trans and queer friendly books and able to really learn a lot from them, right? So we're just going to kind of go old school style, and I'm going to show you three pieces that really make a difference to me in my writing, and that if they were not around, it would lessen the impact, right? So this is one of my favorite books, Trapdoor, Transcultural Production and the Politics of Visibility. I I love this text, and I feel like, you know, it's really fantastic and accessible for high schoolers, people who are trying to learn about trans history. I learned about Sir Lady Java reading this. I read some things from older, elderly, like trans writers and activists who really actually affect the work. And I just remember like sitting in bed and crying as I was reading this because so many things hit me really relevantly, right? Sarah Ahmed, who is also a lesbian feminist writer, is also featured in this book as well. And the impact of this book that it had on me was just learning about how trans figures have affected history and how people who identify on my spectrum have like been vocal and loud in movements that involve the arts, in like civil rights movements. So I was moved by this, and I think in sharing these books, what I want to say is that it's just really tricky and difficult and a little bit confining if you aren't able to have access to these narratives. And I'm sharing these books as like, if banned books were even expanded even more, it would really constrict how writers actually get the information that they need to build how they write about themselves, right? I also want to share a youth book that I read called Jaya and Rosa, the love story. This was a fantastic novel, and it also is like for teenagers. It was a love story, and it's also got various gender identities within the characters. And this was a really fun read. I was reading it in the lens of like being an adult and thinking about if I were a queer youth reading this, right? I think it's so important that we create writing and work that actually illuminates the identities of LGBTQ folks. And this is exactly like what this novel and other novels are doing as well, right? The last book I wanted to share that we also did some judging with is by a Black poet named Inez Smith, Don't Call Us Dead, right? This is written by a gay Black writer, and it's just haunting and shocking. And I think in the words and the images and the literature and the way that like it talks about Black history and Black queer history is really fantastic. And again, when I think about reading books like this, I'm also a poet and this influences my work, what it would be like if I had to deal with books that I related to that were censored to my work, right? So I just wanted to share a couple of things that have influenced me as a writer and say, I think the difference for me coming from like living in the North and coming down to the South is I've always felt really free to express and publish with the identity very clear that I am a Black queer writer. And sometimes like now that stuff is coming up in terms of banned books, ones that really already mean something to me, I think as a writer, you start to sort of think about, well, wow, how is my content going to be censored in the future, right? So I just wanted to give that perspective. I'm really happy to be asked to be here. I think in terms of the future, I want there to be systems in which books are able to flourish without feeling censored, and for artists to always make sure that they do not feel censored. So I encourage you all to support LGBT groups like Lambda Literary Foundation and the Publishing Triangle that support books that currently exist and we want to continue to exist. And as a writer, I feel the space to actually like write inside of my own identity, but I also do feel the push of censorship. So this has an effect on folks who are thinking about continuing to write narratives to talk about our future and how we can speak to younger people about writing and also encourage them to become writers and be okay with writing about their own identities. So thank you all. I really appreciate you having me. And I so look forward to the rest of this conversation.
Thank you, Ashton. Could you one more time, because I believe in shameless plugging of other people's stuff, could you one more time let us know and let us see the book in which you have your writing?
Yes. Okay, so this is
with that.
Yes, thank you, Pearl. This is called All About Skin, short fiction by women of color. It's published by the University of Wisconsin. It has really wonderful featured writers in here. And currently I'm working on a collection of poems called Black Amphibian. stay tuned in the new year for when it will be published. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time, your energy, and you sharing those books that matter to you. And I hope that everyone who is still with us can see the connection that we're making, that it's not just about librarians and educators and the readers, but the writers, the poets, the novelists. There's so many pieces that are connected to this. And I don't want to waste any time going to our next presenter, who is Justice Singleton, a queer screenwriter and a teacher and educator in his own right. So please, Justice, join me. And I'm so happy that you're here, and I'm very excited to hear what you're going to offer us.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. I also feel a little bit like Ashton giving me the book reading. I'm like, I need to write down all the books that even I have not fully expanded into. I am a screenwriter, poet, and I am a workshop teacher. I primarily teach both kids and teenagers and also young adults and women of color about storytelling. And I'm also a queer mass trans man who is kind of approaching this town hall in a bit of a research for myself. When I think about how important storytelling is, I think about how a lot of the greatest stories begin with someone just having the urge to have their voice being heard. And a lot of marginalized communities throughout history, we have had a long struggle and history of having our voices heard. And young people are definitely going to feel the burden of not being able to access queer LGBTQ storytelling. And because of that, I feel like that's where I'm coming in, because as a teacher who is concerned with how they feel about telling their stories, it's also about access. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how I experienced this. I'm a person who grew up in a way of how Amanda's saying, like reading about white boys and their dogs, and also reading a lot about white culture, and that manifests into like Huckleberry Finn stories and Scarlet Letter. And it wasn't until I was literally in my maybe 21, 20s where I heard about queer writers. And so for me, it was like, I really wanted to really explore how is this possible? How is it that these stories and narratives of queer people and Black people have been taken away from me at a very early age? And it goes back to, again, the banning of books, but it also goes back to the access of literature. I grew up learning that knowledge is power. And for me, I feel like when I go in to teach workshops to empower the next generation, you have to tell them what is there, what exists. When I think about the LGBT youth, I think about their mental health and the fact that it is likely that a person who is an LGBTQ youth is 4 times likely to commit suicide, to go through depression, to not understand their transformation. So really coming into this, I think about how the narrative of how we're being attacked is really a part of white fragility, and how our youth, and that means queer youth, is we don't fit in. We can't grow up. We're not meant to fit in. We're meant to stand out. So I kind of feel like, you know, when I think of censorship and I think of the history of censorship, I think of how we really need to attack, and I don't want to say attack, but we really need to join forces with the youth. We need to join forces with teenagers and really give them the tools. When I work in workshops, a lot of kids are like afraid to speak. They're afraid to stand up, and they have all the tools. They have the stories. They have all that. And so I think like having access to public libraries, you know, giving children at any age the idea that their stories matter in the very beginning is extremely important. Something that I was really interested in what Amanda is saying is that even if you are a white person, this matters. Like it is not even a racial thing at this point. They're so organized in how they are attacking our narratives, our histories, because LGBTQ plus people are people that also go into ableism, racism. It's not just one thing. And when you look at queerness is the narrative of queerness involves keeping people out of access to economic justice, racial justice. It's kind of across the boards. And I feel like at this point, it's a little bit of kind of what Toni Morrison has taught us, which is to not allow us to have access, to force us into a place where we are starved, is the goal. It's something that they want us to feel. And it's necessary for us to really imagine, like, what is the world going to look like if we give up? And so that's kind of where like I am in terms of like when I think of, you know, the banning of books. But then I also think like as a workshop teacher or a educator or a screenwriter, like what is my duty? What is my responsibility? And right now I feel like my responsibility to share with other screenwriters and other people who are, you know, writers, is to constantly share your story, not the story that's just fictionalized in your head, not the story you think people want to hear, but your story, to make a really clear effort to tell strangers your story. A lot of what's happening, I think, in the community as I transitioned was even people who do not know about queer lives or trans lives, they're learning it from false media. And so they do not have the education. And so I'm not saying it's our job or our responsibility to give them that, but I'm saying we are also the directors of our lives, and we are also the influences of culture in other people's lives. So to start telling, you know, people that you know, your neighbors or whatever, who have questions, hey, this is where I think things are going, or hey, this is where I'd like to direct you. It really makes a huge difference. When I was transitioning, I didn't have access, even I didn't have access to know what transitioning physically, mentally or emotionally looked like. I am now 30 years old and I have just a bit more experience and knowledge. But I honestly I'm still not as knowledgeable as I want. And so I direct myself by talking to my friends, by talking to my family, by reading, by going on Reddit. And I can't imagine a world in which we are being retaught to not reach out for knowledge, to not give ourselves those tools of power. And I think that in the future, the world really will look different because of, obviously you have social media and you have TikTok, and you can I have a degree in all three of them. And it will look different, but ultimately really sacred places like libraries, really sacred places like holding a book and really reading what someone's point of view is one of those things that once it disappears, we really lose a lot of our humanity. This fight, the fight to keep us in contact with our stories, in contact with our community, with ourselves and our identities, is one that I think is never ending. It is really a constant struggle. And so the battle really goes into saying no, into saying, yes, I want to see this, or in really sharing how you feel and how you've gone through the process. With that said, I am really honored to be a part of this town hall. When I transitioned, which was basically in the last couple of years, I came from Los Angeles to New Orleans. I honestly did not know anything about pronouns. I didn't know I knew what transness looked like, but I came from a Hollywood media where they told us what queerness looks like. And now that I'm in the midst of Louisiana, New Orleans culture, I feel really blessed to be here. I understand that grassroots community organizing, as well as having your queer friends involved with your life is where the knowledge begins and the process begins for becoming a better person. And so when people do groups and town halls for this, I'm really appreciative, because I can only imagine that parents, teachers, and younger generations need to know that this exists, that this is going on, and that banning knowledge needs to stop. And so my last thing is kind of leaving you with a quote that I got from Toni Morrison, which is like one of my favorite authors. And I also think is a person who wrote a fantastic book on banning of books called Burn This Book, which is really brilliant. And so here's the quote. Efforts to censor, starve, regulate, and annihilate us are clear signs that something important has taken place. The thought that leads me to contemplate with dread is the erasure of other voices, of unread novels, poets, whispered or swallowed for fear of being overheard by the wrong people, outlawed languages flourishing underground, essayist questions challenging authority never being posed, unstaged plays, canceled films, that the thought is a nightmare, as though a whole universe is being described in invisible ink. This is a place in which I feel Toni is telling us to go to work, to use our voice, and to be brave, and to not fear, I guess, the Boogiemans. So that's my TED Talk.
Thank you, Justice, so much. Yeah, I have some things I wrote down as you were talking. You were talking about the white boys and their dogs, and it reminded me that in To Kill a Mockingbird, trigger warning for anyone who this might be upsetting to, but in To Kill a Mockingbird, the word nigger is in there like 48 times. Like there are things that we're exposed to that are deemed acceptable, and you had me thinking about. That not only the erasure of our voices of communities that are silenced and marginalized, but the presentation of those same groups in a very specific way. So that there's a continuation of stereotype, there's a continuation of the expectation that, there's the mammy character, all of those things, right? The things that are deemed as acceptable by the people who are attacking or wanting to ban books are able to flourish, with those being harmful narratives when they're not countered and balanced with like real narratives. And I also want to honor you bringing up us looking to young people and looking to youth and acknowledging that they have all the tools that are needed. We just need to make sure we like back up and listen. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
And
a great moderator.
Thanks. I'm loving this. Y'all are fantastic. I'm just like, oh, what? That was good, like backstage. So I really appreciate that. And, I also want to tap on what you said about white fragility. And we need to come head on with that, because if we look at the energy that is banning books by and about Black people, queer people, LGBTQIA folks, Jewish people, Middle Eastern people, books that have information on the history of genocides of entire cultures. If we look at CRT or critical race theory, which I brought up earlier, as well as Don't Say Gay, and attacks on the information I said before. You said white fragility, and I want to answer the question, but why? And it's because stories and information offer enlightenment. We are in a wonderful period where we have words for our feelings. We have pronouns, and that we can call them pronouns. When I was younger, I didn't know trans, I didn't know non-binary, I didn't know the words for my own experience because I wasn't exposed to them. And now they are around, and I'm able to shift them, and I'm able to hold them. So there's a very real shining diamond in everything that you're saying in terms of stories and information offer enlightenment and therefore create a more open and loving society. And that is a threat to fragility. That is a threat to rhetoric that believes that because someone has more, you innately have less. That is not something that is real when it comes to books, because there are more books out there about the experiences that people may feel uncomfortable about. Doesn't mean that there are less or there is less space for their experience. So thank you, Justice. Thank you, Ashton. I appreciate the writer, the teacher, the perspectives that both of you brought. So thank you so much. And I also want to put us into a smooth transition to talk to Anaya Robinson, who is with the ACLU of Louisiana. We've talked about why it's important to learn from our community and learn about our history and different ways we can be involved. And also, we can't leave out voting as a part of this process. If we look at school board presidents and school board elections that are happening across the state, they are undoubtedly connected to what we're seeing happening in Ruston, Livingston Parish, all across Louisiana. So please join me in trugging along into the last portion, or one of the last portions of this amazing town hall. Books, bands, and the Boogeyman. I'm pretty sure that's right, in the right order. Anaya, welcome to the space, and I'm really excited for the voter and civic engagement information you are about to share.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. My name is Anaya, she, they, and I work at the ACLU of Louisiana. First, I just want to thank Peyton, Pearl, Amanda, Lindsay, Justin, Ashton, and all of our LocALL coalition members for planning and facilitating this town hall. Kind of jumping off of what Pearl was saying just a couple minutes ago, I think the reason that we're seeing these bans is because people are too stubborn and scared to deal with their pain. And so they resort to hate because it's just easier for them. And that was not something that I came up with myself. That's actually an idea that I got from one of my favorite authors, James Baldwin, who was Black and gay. I also think that people are fearful to confront the strict binaries that they've been indoctrinated with. And so they're afraid of what seems extraordinary and precious and gorgeous and free, which, to be clear, that's what Black and LGBTQ plus people are. So I'm off my soapbox now. My job is to share resources with you on how you can take action. So you've gotten a lot of rich information tonight. So the next job is to figure out how we're going to use it. So I first just want to lift up the resources Amanda shared in her video, the Get Ready, Stay Ready toolkit, and the Public Library directory. And there's also the censorship toolkit from the Louisiana Association of School Librarians. And I'm also going to copy and paste a link to a website called Book Riot that gives some more tools and resources about how to fight back against censorship. So we've got a lot for y'all. So in addition to those resources, we're also going to talk about fun things like voting. So we know that voting is sometimes a hard topic for folks in Louisiana because there is a history of voter suppression in this state. And we want to acknowledge that. And we also want to acknowledge that there's groups of people in this state who simply can't exercise their right to vote, depending on what some people's histories are within the criminal legal system, depending on what folks' citizenship status is. Those are some things that prevent some folks from voting in this state, as well as if you are someone who has gone through the interdiction process, which we know a lot of people with disabilities go through that process where their right to vote is taken away. So I just wanted to first name that and honor that, because again, we know that it's sometimes really hard to talk about that. But if you are one of those people who can vote, we're asking you to vote in all elections. Because number one, think about the groups of people that I just mentioned who unfortunately don't have the right to vote. They still have to have some way that their voice is heard. So you could vote at the polls in their honor, in their best interest. And also, like Pearl mentioned earlier, local elections, especially elections for local school boards, those matter. And surprise, surprise, we've got an election going on right now. Early voting is happening right now. in Louisiana. Early voting actually started yesterday and it ends on November 1st. And the only day that you can't vote within this week is October 30th. So, yes, you can even still show up to the polls in your costume on Halloween. But if you can't early vote, then election day is November 8th. Also, if you're a trans or gender non-conforming voter, the ACLU of Louisiana has a voting ball trans guide that we developed along with our partners at Louisiana Trans Advocates. And we also have a handout that you can give to poll commissioners if you happen to experience transphobia, discrimination, or harassment at the polls. So there should be some links that are dropped in the chat right now. But those are a bunch of resources. Please put your questions in the chat if you have them, and I'll turn it back over to Pearl. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And also thank you for honoring the various states of voting and the things that happen within our state and around our country. It is very important for us to hold space for that. And I believe that if you look in the comments, you'll be able to find the links to the resources that Anaya was talking about, as well as the resources that have been mentioned earlier on this evening. I'm going to double check that there aren't any more questions, and we might be calling it. So awesome, excellent. So it sounds like we are calling it. We don't have any more questions. I hope that you all feel full of information and that you feel energized for whatever we are going into, and that we are going into it together. Please, one more time, know that you can look at your parish public library list by region. That'll give you information on the website for your parish library board, as well as board meeting updates. You can put it on when you're cooking, when you're driving. We know that you have many responsibilities and schedules. So please tap into that, as well as getreadystayready.info, and that having a toolkit on there for you with library resources, civic engagement resources, trainings, and short courses. If you want to keep track of which books are being banned, because it's happening at such a speedy rate, you can type in PEN America in Google, or you can go to pen.org, and that's like a writing pen, pen.org. And then, yes, I believe Anaya put the other resources in the chat. So thank you once again for joining us. Thank you for spending time with us. I would like to say thanks again to LocALL folks. A thank you to LTA, a thank you to Ashton from REJAC, Southern Organizers Academy, Forum for Equality, ACLULA, Amanda Jones, Justice Singleton. Thank you very, very much, Lindsay Bach-Friedman. And if I am forgetting anyone, it's only because it's late and I need dinner. So thank you all for joining us for this amazing town hall. Please feel empowered, keep reading, keep writing, and let's make sure we keep our minds and our thoughts and what we learn free and accessible to everyone. Thank you and good night.